In the quiet town of Kitchener, Ontario, a young woman named Melinda Vasilije was living the typical life of a vibrant 22-year-old. Melinda was full of dreams and ambition, beloved by her friends and family for her joyful spirit and the warmth she exuded. Her striking beauty turned heads, but it was her effervescent personality that drew people close to her. A loving daughter, a caring sister, and a dedicated friend, she was the glue in her tight-knit circle of friends. To those who knew her, Melinda was more than just a pretty face. She was a symbol of light and hope. Yet even the brightest light can be dimmed by the shadow of toxic love. And in Melinda's case, that shadow took the form of Agar Hassan, a tall, dark, and enigmatic man whose presence could be both captivating and menacing. The two had been dating on and off for over a year, a tumultuous relationship marked by passionate highs and turbulent lows. Despite the red flags, Melinda couldn't seem to break free from Agar's grip. He was magnetic, drawing her in with his charm one moment and pushing her away with his volatility the next. Their relationship was an emotional roller coaster, with moments of intense affection followed by bouts of jealousy and heated arguments. Friends and family often warned Melinda about Agar. They had seen the subtle changes in her, the way she became withdrawn, anxious, and increasingly isolated from the people who loved her. But Melinda was convinced that she could fix things. She believed, like so many before her, that if she could just love him enough, he would change. By the spring of 2017, their relationship had reached a breaking point. The arguments had become more frequent, the tension palpable. Melinda had tried to end things several times, but Agar always found a way to pull her back in, whether through grand gestures of apology or by manipulating her emotions with threats of self-harm. He made her feel responsible for his well-being, trapping her in a cycle of guilt and fear. In April, Melinda decided she had had enough. She was tired of the emotional abuse, the manipulation, and the constant fear. She wanted out for good this time. Her friends rallied around her, encouraging her to move on and leave Agar behind for good. Melinda seemed resolute. She was ready to reclaim her life and start anew. But little did she know, her decision to cut ties with Agar would set in motion a chain of events that would end in unspeakable horror. On the evening of April 27, 2017, Melinda made what would be her final decision regarding Agar. Despite her friend's advice to avoid seeing him, she agreed to meet him one last time. She believed that they needed closure, one last conversation to put their chaotic relationship to rest once and for all. Perhaps part of her still hoped that Agar would understand and finally let her go. It was a decision she would come to regret. Agar arrived at Melinda's apartment around 11 p.m. Tension hung in the air as the couple sat down to talk. According to Agar's later account, the conversation quickly turned heated. Melinda stood her ground, telling him she was done. She didn't want to fight anymore, didn't want to continue the toxic cycle they had fallen into. But Agar, consumed by jealousy and rage, couldn't accept it. His love for Melinda had morphed into something dark and possessive, a dangerous obsession. As the argument escalated, Agar's desperation grew. He couldn't stand the thought of losing her, of watching her move on without him. In a fit of rage, he lunged at her. The scene that followed was nothing short of a nightmare. What happened next inside that small apartment was a brutal and violent attack that no one could have anticipated. Agar Hassan, overcome with fury, grabbed a knife from the kitchen and unleashed his rage on Melinda in a frenzy. He stabbed her repeatedly, once, twice, 10 times. But he didn't stop. His anger was insatiable, driving him to stab Melinda a total of 47 times. Blood spattered the walls and floors, the sounds of the struggle echoing through the apartment. Melinda, a woman who had so much life left to live, was helpless against the onslaught. She fought back, but the brutality of the attack was too much. By the time Agar finally stopped, she was lying motionless on the floor, her body a canvas of violence and pain. The apartment, once a place of comfort, was now a blood-soaked crime scene. Agar stood over her lifeless body, the reality of what he had done beginning to sink in. His rage dissipated, replaced by a chilling emptiness. He fled the scene, leaving Melinda to die alone in her apartment. In the silence that followed, the enormity of his crime seemed to settle into the walls. The woman he claimed to love, The woman he couldn't bear to lose was gone, taken by his own hands in a fit of uncontrollable rage. The next morning, Melinda's friend, who had been worried after not hearing from her, decided to check on her. As she approached the apartment, a sense of dread washed over her. When she knocked and got no response, she used her spare key to enter the apartment. What she found was a scene of unimaginable horror. Melinda's lifeless body lay on the floor, covered in blood. Her friend immediately called 911, her frantic voice breaking as she tried to explain what she had found. The police arrived quickly and the investigation began. It didn't take long for them to identify the prime suspect, Agar Hassan. His name had been mentioned in the calls between Melinda and her friends leading up to the incident, and his recent behavior had raised alarm bells. But Agar was nowhere to be found. After the murder, he had gone on the run, fleeing the country in an attempt to evade capture. The police launched a manhunt, alerting the public and urging anyone with information to come forward. Agar Hassan had fled to the United States, slipping through the cracks and avoiding capture by moving from state to state. As the manhunt intensified, Agar's behavior became increasingly erratic. He began posting on social media, taunting both the police and the public. In a series of chilling Instagram posts and blog entries, he attempted to justify his actions, claiming that the murder had been a crime of passion and that Melinda had attacked him first. His posts were riddled with contradictions, and his attempts to paint himself as a victim fell flat. No one believed his story. How could they? The evidence against him was overwhelming. Melinda had been stabbed 47 times. This wasn't a case of self-defense. This was a savage, premeditated attack fueled by jealousy and obsession. Despite his efforts to stay on the run, Agar couldn't escape forever. In July 2017, after months of pursuit, he was finally apprehended in Texas during a routine traffic stop. He had been living out of his car, moving from city to city, always looking over his shoulder. His capture brought a sense of relief to those who had been following the case. But for Melinda's family, it was only the beginning of a long and painful road to justice. The trial of Agar Hassan was a highly publicized event, with media outlets across Canada and the United States covering the case closely. Melinda's family sat in the courtroom every day, waiting for justice to be served. They listened as the prosecution laid out the evidence in painstaking detail. The text messages, the phone records, the security camera footage that showed Agar fleeing the scene. They heard from friends and experts who described the pattern of abuse and manipulation that Agar had subjected Melinda to in the months leading up to her death. Agar's defense team tried to argue that the murder had been a crime of passion, that Agar had lost control in the heat of the moment. But the jury wasn't swayed. The sheer brutality of the attack, the number of stab wounds, and the premeditated nature of his actions made it clear that this was not a simple case of losing control. This was a cold-blooded murder. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, Agar Hassan was convicted of second-degree murder. The verdict brought some measure of closure to Melinda's family, but the pain of losing her in such a violent and senseless way would never truly heal. They had lost a daughter, a sister, and a friend, and no amount of justice could bring her back. Today, Melinda Vasilije's story remains a haunting reminder of the dangers of toxic relationships and the devastating consequences they can have. Her family has vowed to honor her memory by raising awareness about domestic violence, hoping to prevent others from suffering the same fate. They speak out at events and vigils, sharing Melinda's story in the hopes that it will inspire others to seek help before it's too late. In Kitchener, her memory lives on in the hearts of those who knew and loved her. Every year on the anniversary of her death, friends and family gather to remember Melinda, the woman with the bright smile and the kind heart who was taken too soon. They light candles in her honor and share stories of the good times they shared with her, keeping her spirit alive even in the face of tragedy. The Melinda Vasilije case is one that will be remembered for years to come. A chilling tale of love turned deadly, of a young woman whose life was brutally cut short by the very person she trusted the most. It is a story that underscores the fragility of relationships and the tragic consequences that can arise when love transforms into obsession, jealousy, and violence.